You stand beneath the colonnades of the Forum Romanum, while the early sunlight still falls at an angle across the paving stones, and long shadows stretch over steps worn smooth by countless feet. In your hands is a small family matter, yet in that space you quickly sense something much larger. In Rome, not every voice reached other ears with the same weight. A man of higher standing needed only to step half a pace forward, and the order around him seemed to adjust itself. No one gave a command, yet everyone understood his place. It was in moments like these that Roman society revealed its nature, a world deeply shaped by status, honor, and boundaries already drawn long before any single exchange began. To understand why such an order could endure for so long, we must begin with the feeling of living inside it. And if you'd like to go deeper into that question, subscribe to the channel and join this journey. Before Romans argued about fairness, they already lived inside a world divided by names. The most visible surface line was between patricii and plebes. Patricii were ancient noble lineages with long-held prestige, plebes were the free common people, far more numerous, yet initially with less weight in public affairs. The point is not merely that these labels existed, but that they entered daily rhythm like footsteps on stone, whose family record preceded them into the square, whose voice was believed more readily, whose doorways opened with less resistance. The struggle between these orders lasted for generations, a reminder that the gap was never a minor detail. It was a deep fracture running through Roman life. From here, one begins to see inequality in Rome first as an experience that had a name. Yet if you see patricii and plebes as a rigid cut, you miss something subtler. Over time, the boundary was not only lineage, it thickened with wealth, inherited reputation, and the ability to keep influence across generations. Under the single label common, some walked with the heavy confidence of money and connections. Within noble, some houses slowly faded beneath their own older glory. That is what makes Rome so compelling to modern viewers. Not a simple two-color portrait, but a world where bloodline and property wrap around each other like vines on ancient stone. A person is born into a place, yet public life measures them by many rulers at once. And when those measurements overlap, rank becomes dense, difficult to loosen, and easy to accept as the way things have always been. Move one step closer, and we begin to see that hierarchy in Rome was not only spoken about, it was seen, felt, almost heard. In sunlight brushing across the forum where one stood, how one approached a powerful man, the style of cloak, the color of a border, even the rhythm of waiting at another man's doorway could all speak for status. Rome made social distance visible, so people did not need to memorize many terms to sense who stood on the higher rung. It taught people how to look at one another. When an order is carved that deeply into ritual and space, inequality is no longer an abstract idea. It becomes a habit of the eye, the ear, and of the body itself, instinctively knowing where to stand. Then a deeper question opens like a door into the interior. If rank in Rome was not only for display, what did it decide in real life? It decided who truly belonged to the Roman community and how fully. Many modern people expect belonging to be a sharp border. Either you have it, or you do not. Romans grew used to intermediate steps. A person could live under Roman power, work, bear obligations, even serve in war, yet still not hold the same rights as someone else. Rome became remarkably skilled at widening its circle of influence while keeping an inner distance inside that circle. When the story moves from the square into legal standing, something very Roman appears. Even belonging itself was tiered, like the stone seating of an amphitheater. At the center of that ladder stood civitas, Roman legal membership, the recognized standing of belonging under Roman law. But civitas was not merely an honorific. It carried concrete rights, voting, holding office, military service, while the real weight of certain rights could still be tied to property. So even among those recognized as Roman, the heaviness of a voice could differ. Picture a crowded gathering beneath a dusty bright sky. All are inside, yet not all are heard the same way. This is the Roman paradox, at once expansive and carefully guarded. Rome could grant standing without granting equality of standing. From here, intermediate categories like the Latini come into sharper view. Suppose you live in a community closely bound to Rome, you speak Latin, you trade with Romans, you even move to the city, yet you still do not enjoy the full rights of a complete Roman citizen. What does that feel like? This is where we meet the Latini, and what was called jus latii, the Latin right, a middle tier distinctive to the Roman world. In many cases, such communities could keep local governance and enjoy substantial privileges, while lacking key powers such as voting at Rome. It is a striking political invention. Rather than only inside or outside, Rome created an in-between zone, close enough to bind, far enough to preserve distance. It expanded influence without flattening every boundary. For those living in that middle tier, life likely carried both hope and limitation, a familiar sensation in any layered society. Lower still on that ladder were the peregrini, people outside full Roman standing, often residents of communities ruled by Rome or drawn into its orbit without being fully absorbed. In discussions of Roman legal categories, Latini and peregrini often appear side by side to show that even among non-citizens, distinctions were real. This matters because Rome did not split the world into two halves. It arranged life in concentric circles. The nearer circle held more rights. The farther circle remained within the empire's gravity, yet carried sharper limits. When you imagine stone roads running from provincial towns toward Rome, merchant caravans, soldiers, tax collectors, imagine also something invisible traveling with them, different degrees of legal standing, shaping how each person could be treated in countless ordinary situations. Suppose you and your neighbor both live under the Roman eagle, both sell in the market, both raise children, both contribute to local life, yet because your legal standing differs, one of you can marry with full Roman legal recognition while the other must take a narrower path. One can assert rights more easily while the other is constrained. This is not dry scholarship. It reaches into the home, the marriage contract, property, and a child's future. Civitas connected to civil and political rights, and even within that sphere, the real force of certain rights could depend on property. In Rome, belonging almost always carried a second question. Belonging at what level? When a society places everyday matters, marriage, office, military service on different tiers, inequality does not remain at the summit of power. It descends into family life itself. Here the story touches a major turning point. In 8212, Caracalla's decree, Constitutio Antoniniana, extended Roman citizenship to nearly all free people across the empire. On paper, it was a rare historical expansion. The circle of belonging widened so far that older boundaries seemed ready to dissolve. Yet Rome's deeper lesson is harsher. Equality on paper does not automatically erase privilege in lived reality. As some older distinctions faded, a new gulf became clearer between those regarded as more honorable, honestiores, and those seen as lower, humiliores. It is a cold reminder that legal status can broaden while treatment remains tiered by wealth, honor, and social weight. And that road now leads into the place where rank is learned earliest and held deepest, the household. Some powers do not need the public square to shape an entire life. In Rome, such power often began at the threshold of the family. At the center stood the paterfamilias, the male legal head of the household, usually the father or the senior living male of the line. In lamplight and the soft footfalls of servants across an inner courtyard, he was not only the keeper of custom, he was the point where honor, property, and decision gathered for everyone under his authority. What startles modern viewers is that home here is not merely a refuge of feeling. It is a place with sharp order, where each role carries a different degree of independence. To understand why Romans accepted rank outside, you must watch how they learned rank at the table, in marriage arrangements, and in the daily instruction of family life. When Romans spoke of patria potestas, they meant the father's power in law, yet wider than modern instincts expect. It was the legal authority of the household head over descendants in the male line, including adopted children. In older forms, it implied a very broad control, and in principle placed key civil authority within the family sphere. In other words, even an adult son might not be fully independent in property while still under patria potestas. Picture a large house with storerooms, wax tablets for accounts, keys hanging by a wooden post. Everything suggests that decision is concentrated in one place. That order did more than preserve family discipline. It taught early and repeatedly that legitimate power is power arranged in steps, above and below. Suppose you are a Roman woman born into a well-to-do family. You attend rites, manage the household, uphold the family's public face, perhaps even shape decisions from behind the scenes. Does that mean you always control your own legal choices? The answer is often more intricate than a simple yes or no. Here the story turns to status mulierum, the standing of women in Roman life. Many women were clearly present in family and community, yet their autonomy could still be placed inside frameworks of guardianship and moral expectation that vary by period, class, and marital condition. The deeper pattern is a familiar paradox. The closer you look, the more you see that visibility and legal control do not always travel together. In the rustle of fabric and the glint of bronze against jewelry, gender itself begins to appear as a rung within a larger order. One term that can make listeners stumble is tutela mulierum, legal guardianship applied to women in various contexts of Roman law. This does not mean all women lived the same life, nor that there were no spaces to maneuver. History shows that dependency shifted across time, class, and family circumstance. Yet the core point remains, even when a woman held property and influence inside the household, legal form could still place a frame around her, limiting full control compared with men of similar standing. And this is why certain moments carry unusual weight, like Hortensia, daughter of the orator Hortensius, who was remembered for speaking in the Forum in 42 BC against taxes imposed on wealthy women during civil war. Ancient sources such as Appian preserve this as a rare public moment when a woman's voice entered the political air of Rome, precisely when order touched property and honor. Power in Rome did not always appear as shouting. Often it appeared as procedure, signatures, and a representative standing beside you, and in rare moments as a speech that made the whole square listen. Sometimes a law about jewelry is enough to reveal what a society fears. The Lex Appia, passed in 215 BC during wartime, restricted how much gold women could wear in the display of dress. Years later, when circumstances changed, debate over repealing it flared fiercely. The lasting interest is not simply clothes or ornament. It is how Romans linked virtue, luxury, war, and household discipline into one chain of concern for public stability. Imagine the streets of Rome packed with onlookers, arguments echoing between stone and column, while the underlying question is not merely what may women wear, but what order is being kept in place. Here, gender is not a separate corner. It touches honor, wealth, and the anxious sense that if one boundary loosens, others may tremble with it. When we gather together the fragments of life within the Roman family, the power of the father, the position of children, the framework of guardianship around women, and the rules of modesty and display, we begin to see something enduring. Romans did not learn hierarchy first through speeches, but through habits repeated day after day. They learned it in the way one sat at the table, in who decided a marriage arrangement, in whose name property was held, and in the look cast upon a woman considered proper or improper. It was this repetition that made rank feel natural, as though it had always existed in the walls of the house, the inner courtyard, and the ancestral shrine. So when Romans stepped from the household into the laboring life of the empire, they did not have to learn an entirely new language of power. They encountered only a wider, colder, and less concealed version of what was already familiar. From here, the hardest foundation of inequality comes into view, the condition of bondage. Some of the foundations of an empire do not appear in triumphal arches, but in the faint pull of chains, the early opening of storeroom doors, and the laboring hand that has no right to direct its own life. In Rome, people held in bondage, servi, formed a vast part of that world of labor. What is difficult for a modern viewer to forget is the contrast. A society that placed such value on law, ritual, and honor also depended heavily on human beings treated as property. In the townhouse on the estate, in the workshop at the harbor, and in the marketplace, dependent labor became so woven into daily necessity that those who benefited from it could regard it as part of the natural landscape. Because inequality here was tied to bread, olive oil, transport, record-keeping, and the rhythm of everyday life, it was never only a story told at the upper levels of power. It passed through the smell of kitchen smoke, the sound of pounding grain, and the lamplight of crowded courtyards at the end of the day. If we want to understand why Roman inequality possessed such a particular coldness, we must look at the way the law could reduce a human being to utility and exchange value. In many contexts, those held in servitude were not treated as independent legal persons in the way free people were recognized. This produced a form of dehumanization that was at once brutal and orderly. A human life entered into property accounts, calculations of labor, and plans of production and service. The more closely we read descriptions of the Roman household, the more clearly we see that even the early idea of familia was closely bound to the group of dependents in bondage under the same roof. That detail makes the Roman family far more complicated than it first appears. The father's authority was not only the authority of a parent, but also shadowed by the power to command forced labor. It is precisely there that family order, wealth, and the condition of bondage are knotted together into a bond that is very difficult to untangle. But people held in bondage in Rome were not present only in extreme images. They were also present in the most ordinary tasks, which made them all the easier to render invisible in the memory of those who benefited from their work. Imagine a morning in a prosperous household, doors opening, lamps dimming, water being carried in, account tablets laid out, the fire being lit, clothing prepared for the master of the house before he steps outside. On a larger scale, there were fields, warehouses, workshops, and transport caravans. Inequality, then, did not reside only in declarations of honor. It was absorbed into the operating rhythm of the city itself. Broad scholarship on Roman bondage and manumission also shows that in Rome, household-based servitude made formal release relatively more common than in some other places, a detail that opens the door to hope, while also reminding us that such hope still began from a position of ownership. It is from this point that the possibility of a conditional rise in status comes into view. Imagine that you are a person held in bondage who has just been granted freedom after many years of service in a Roman household. The moment would surely feel lighter, as though you had stepped out of a sealed room. But did the door opening before you lead straight to equality? In Rome, the answer was usually no. Liberti or libertini, the freed, did indeed cross into a new condition, but that condition came with limits upon honor, opportunity, and the way society regarded them. What makes this story especially rich in documentary terms is its half-lit, half-shadowed quality. Rome did not wholly close the path upward. On the contrary, it showed that advancement was possible. Yet even as it opened that path, it built steps and barriers that preserved distance between the freed and those born free. Freedom here was not a leap outside the old order, but more often a movement into another level within the same order, where the past still followed behind like a long shadow. With that new freedom, an older cord often did not fully break the obligation of patronage toward the former master. This is a crucial link for understanding how Rome could change individual fate while keeping the larger frame intact. A free person could build a life, trade, marry, yet still remain tied to a patronus, the patron, often the former owner, in a relationship that combines support with dependency. That tie opens onto the wider world of patronus and clients, where gratitude and distance coexist in a social ritual repeated again and again. Picture a powerful man's doorway open to dawn, greetings exchanged, leather sandals on stone, faces waiting to be recognized. Rank is not only imposed there, it is sustained by hope, by obligation, and by the need to lean on others in a crowded city. From here, the patron-client web steps fully into view. Alongside that new standing are boundaries you may not see, yet you can feel in daily life. Legal status can change quickly, but social respect can take generations. Freed people often gained far better legal footing than before, yet did not automatically enter the same tier of honor as those long born free. That is Roman. A person's condition may change, but the memory of hierarchy around that condition does not vanish. Imagine a street at morning, shop shutters rising, metal clinking, bargaining beginning. Within that rhythm, People remember who descends from whom, who once belonged to which household. Inequality is not only written in documents. It lives in social memory, in glances, and in how a community measures who deserves esteem. At the meeting point of hope and limitation, a distinctly Roman thread becomes clearer: obligations of patronage after manumission. The former master becomes the patronus. The freed person becomes dependent in a social legal relationship that is no longer ownership, yet not full independence. Rome's organizational genius shows here. It transforms a change of condition into a softer, more polite bond, while still preserving hierarchy. Support is real, opportunity is real, distance is also real. So even when you look at a person who is free, you can see behind them the shadow of a network, order maintained not only by pressure, but by promised protection and the practical need to belong in an immense city. Suppose you are an ordinary Roman, not wealthy, not powerful, with a case before a court or a need for work. Do you turn first to law or to a patron? That question leads into patronus and clients, the patron-client bond where obligation and dependency travel together. Such ties were recognized early, in which patrons offered protection and help, while clients responded with deference, presence, and political support. The bond did not only connect two individuals, it helped the layered society run more smoothly. Many found a pathway through hardship without breaking the frame of rank. Inequality here does not always look like a solid wall. Sometimes it looks like a bridge, watched by a gatekeeper. A Roman mourning can reveal more about rank than any speech. In the ritual of salutatio, the daily greeting, those of lower standing came to the homes of powerful figures to show respect, seek support, and keep ties that sustain their lives. Picture stones still cool, doors opening early, leather sandals tapping steps, short greetings, eyes waiting to be acknowledged. The scene is both courteous and strict. It shows that Roman society was layered not only by law, but by actions repeated every day. Personal ties did not blur order. They made order livable for many, and therefore more durable. From here, the story shifts into another register. Hierarchy not merely greeted and recognized, but measured and recorded through property registers and civic classification. Some power is felt through a gaze. Some power is carved into a ledger. In Rome, the census, the registration of people and property, belongs to the second kind. It was not merely counting heads. It was how the state learned who you were, what you had, and where it placed you in the shared life. Citizens were registered by tribus, voting tribes or administrative divisions, and property was assessed to assign people into groups. Imagine stylus scratches on wax tablets, names read aloud, assets declared, private life enters public measurement. The measurement was not neutral. It prepared for what followed, where wealth did not only mean comfort, but determined the weight of a voice in public decision. Once wealth is measured, hierarchy takes on a very concrete shape. Voting groups and obligations arranged by the capacity to furnish arms and service. The comitia centuriata, the assembly organized by centuries, originally military-based units, offers a key example. It included patricii and plebes, yet divided them into classes and centuries by property and the ability to equip for military duty. Participation was not sealed off entirely to lower ranks, but the weight of participation was not equal. This is a picture modern viewers can linger on, standing within the same assembly, yet beginning from different ground. Rome did not need to shout that property ruled politics. It quietly attached property to the structure of the community, so that political voice carried the imprint of wealth. Suppose you live decently, work hard, hold respect in your neighborhood, yet possess little property. When you enter the civic structures, are you truly counted, or only counted with a lighter weight? That question bridges the census to justice. A society used to counting people by tiers can easily become used to seeing people by tiers elsewhere. Here we reach on estuariores and humiliores, higher and lower strata in the empire's legal social classification. The crucial point is not only the labels. It is their echo. When the language of dignity enters official sorting, distance stops living only in habit. It begins to imprint itself on how a person is treated when trouble brings them before law. Here the cold face of inequality becomes clearest. Descriptions of imperial society note that honestiores could receive gentler treatment in legal proceedings, while humiliores faced harsher handling and greater vulnerability to humiliation. This is not merely a procedural difference. It is a social message spoken through the scales of justice, standing before the same law, yet not preserved with the same dignity. Picture a court space with murmurs beneath a high roof, light falling on stone, silence thickening as everyone senses each person's position in the room. When disparity enters justice, inequality has moved beyond clothing or ritual. It reaches the deepest promise a community makes to a person, how they are recognized when they are judged. Yet if you look at Rome only through legal boundaries, you still miss the spiritual adhesive that kept the order durable. That adhesive was mos maiorum, the custom of the ancestors, inherited ways of living that were not always written law, yet guided what was considered proper. In a society that treasured memory and precedent as measures of worth, what has long been done carried weight almost like moral verdict. Inequality endured not only because some benefited, but because it was wrapped in the sense that a tiered order protected the community from sliding into chaos. This is where the subject becomes intimate for history lovers. You do not only look at stone ruins, you watch how people cling to inherited memory to justify the present. For mos maiorum, Two other terms emerge like keys to understanding why so many Romans accepted social distance as something proper and justified: dignitas and auctoritas. Put simply, dignitas is the accumulated prestige of a person and his family line, while auctoritas is the kind of moral weight and credibility that gives someone's words force even when they do not need to raise their voice. In a society that measures people by the depth of their prestige and authority, hierarchy becomes not only lawful, but also seemingly deserved. That is why social distance in Rome was often accepted not because people were blindly obedient, but because they were taught to see order through the lens of honor, duty, and inherited custom. Beneath temple roofs, within ceremonies, and inside family memory, people learned to revere a social order before they learned to question it. And so the picture closes not with a simple conclusion, but with a deeper question. Inequality in Rome endured not only because power sat at the top, but because it was sustained by many layers at once: ranked legal status, patriarchal family structure, gender and guardianship, forced labor, conditional freedom, patron-client ties, property assessment, stratified justice, and ancestral custom, casting over all of it an air of legitimacy. In the echo of footsteps across ancient stone, what becomes most striking is not merely that the Romans had inequality, many societies do, but that they turned it into a lived landscape, a habit of the eye and of the heart. And at precisely this point, another door begins to open. What happens when crises, political ambition, and imperial upheaval begin to shake that very landscape? If you can see the shadow of these old hierarchies in the modern world, leave a comment below. In the next episode, we will explore how this order begins to crack when those at the bottom start to find their voice.